We begin by praising Allah Azza wa Jalla, Lord of the Alameen, which is mankind, jinn, everything that exists. And we bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is his slave and his messenger. Allah Azza wa Jalla says in the Qur'an, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. O you who believe, fear Allah, the fear that He deserves, and are not accepting the state of Islam, of absolute submission to Allah Azza wa Jalla in all that He has ordered and forbid. My dear brothers in Islam, subhanAllah, I remember a few months ago we mentioned a tabi'i who approached a companion of Rasulullah after the Prophet ﷺ's death, and he asked him, describe Jannah for us. Describe Jannah for us in a way that it would motivate us to work for Jannah. Describe Jannah for us in a way that it would motivate us to work and strive and sacrifice to make it to Jannah. So this companion, this late companion, replies to this tabi'i and he tells him, Fiha Rasulullah. In it is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's enough. It's enough to know Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is there. I want to be there. It's enough to know Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is there for me to work hard to get there. And we mentioned that a companion at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam running through the streets screaming out, Ya Rasulullah, we have a problem. Ya Rasulullah, we have a calamity. Ya Rasulullah, so on and so forth. So the Prophet ﷺ comes out, what's wrong? And the companion replies, he goes, Ya Rasulullah, when we die and we enter Jannah, you notice what he said there? We enter Jannah. So he reckons he's going to die and enter Jannah, yet still he's running around with a calamity, with a problem. What could this problem be? So the Prophet ﷺ said, yes. He said, you're going to be in the highest level and we're going to be in the lower levels, we'll never see you. Look at his problem. Look at his calamity. He can't imagine pleasure, happiness, peace, tranquility without Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The reason I'm recapping these is because today, inshallah, I want to speak about two concepts, two standards, two things by which we can gauge our love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. See, we all say we love Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We all say we love Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I'm sure we do. How can I gauge how much I love him? How can I prove to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to Allah Azza wa Jalla that I actually love him? Because at the end of the day, where we end up in the akhirah depends on it. You will be with those whom you love. How can I gauge how much I love Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? The first gauge, or the first standard that I want to speak about, starts off with the story of Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. So Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, he tells Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam one day, Ya Rasulullah, I love you more than everything in this world except myself. Now this was a man of you know, the straight shooter. No beating around the bush, no metaphors, no similes, no mubaraf ash. Straight out. I love you, Ya Rasulullah, and he means it more than everything in this world except myself. I wonder why he said that in the first place. So subhanAllah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam looks at him and he tells Umar ibn Khattab al-Faruq, the man who spoke and it was revealed in the Qur'an later. He says, Ya Umar, not yet. Your iman is incomplete. He's telling Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, your iman is incomplete. Umar al-Faruq, his iman is incomplete until you love me more than everything in this world, even your own self. So Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu takes a step back and he thinks for a minute or two or three, Allah alam how long it was. And then he comes back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Again, wallahi, not lip service. It's not lip service. He actually comes back in that 1, 2, 3 minutes back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He tells him, Ya Rasulullah, now I love you more than everything in this world, even my own self. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam acknowledged it wasn't lip service, and he says, now Ya Umar, your iman is complete. I ask you by Allah, what happened in those 2 minutes? What changed in those 2 minutes for Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu to go from incomplete iman to complete iman? Here I think what happened, you won't find this in any tafsir books or anything, this is my own understanding. I think what happened was Umar radiallahu anhu recapped his whole life. And he looked at everything that he does and he loves doing, and everything that the Sunnah or Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asks of us. and he found where there are some things he does, or he allows his nafs to do that aren't following the sunnah. And he said, you know what, right now, all those, I'm not talking haram, I'm not talking leaving a sunnah mu'akkadah, something simple, something that's mustahab, if you want to say, that he's left and he's following his nafs in. Maybe it could be an extra hour of sleep he could have got up for tahajjud for. Maybe, whatever it may be, he looked over his entire life and he looked where he was allowing his nafs to overpower the sunnah or the mustahab. And he goes, that's it, I've left it. I've left it for the sake of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then he comes back to Rasulullah, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam acknowledges that this man has now completed his iman. So that's our first gauge. How much of the sunnah do we apply? How much of the sunnah do me and you apply? How can we claim we love Rasulullah, and we all love him? How can we claim we love Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam more than ourselves? What does ourselves mean? It means our nafs. It means my own desires. It means my own wants. I need that fancy big house, man. So I've got to put in all those extra upon extra upon extra upon extra hours. In doing that, I'm not saying it's haram, but what have I left? My ibadah, my sadaqah, my classes, my lessons, my upskilling, spending time with my kids, teaching them the right way. I'm not even talking haram here. How can we claim we love Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam more than our own selves when every single time, or almost every single time, we have a choice between what my nafs wants and what the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is? My nafs wins. Like, come on, who are we kidding? I can judge myself before Allah judges me. If every single time I finish my salah, I got the choice between getting up and praying the sunnah or hanging out at the back and chatting with the boys, my nafs wins. How can I claim I love Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam more than my nafs? If every time I finish, give my salams, I can get up and pray, I can do my adhkar, or I can pull out my phone and respond on those messages that were vibrating while I was praying, and my nafs wins, how can I claim I love Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam more than myself? Fasting versus food. Wallah, Mondays and Thursdays, the 3 middle days, it's not easy, man. I'm at work, I'm this, you know what, leave that aside. Eating a third versus stuffing my face. How many times does stuffing my face win over my nafs? Over the sunnah? Praying in jama'ah after that long day at work. I got home, I'm freshed. Yallah, I'll just pray at home. Versus praying in jama'ah versus praying at home. Sunnah versus nafs. Attending lessons compared to jumping on social media. Posting, liking, flagging, forwarding, sharing, ma ba'arif ash, commenting. Qur'an versus my favorite show. If I've allocated just 10 minutes a day of Qur'an and I didn't get to do it and my show started, what would win? Sadaqah versus that new phone, that new car, that new computer that I'm saving for. If every single time I'm faced, and this happens hundreds of times a day, like every minute of every day I could be doing either something that's increasing the sunnah, adhkar, I can be doing that all day while I'm walking, while I'm eating, whatever I'm doing. If every single time, or gauge how much the percentage of times where I'm versed with the sunnah and my nafs wins. Calculate it. How much is it? 5%, 10%, 20% of the times I apply the sunnah, the other 80 my nafs, 30, 40. This is a gauge of how much we love Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The famous poet, he said, if your love for him was truthful, you would have been obedient to him. For verily the lover towards his beloved is obedient. I hope we can all do this. I hope we can all gauge that love for Rasulullah with how much of the sunnah we apply, because identifying and acknowledging something first is the first step to remedying it. Once I can acknowledge or I can gauge how much of the sunnah I'm applying and how much of love I have towards Rasulullah over my nafs, once I gauge that, that's when I can say, you know what, man, I'm going to start moving up 0.5% a day. One tiny mini mustahab, not even sunnah, at a time. And inshallah, bi'idhnillah, in that way we can improve and we can show and prove our love to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in this dunya and in the akhirah to Allah azza wa jal. SubhanAllah. The second gauge also starts with Umar radiallahu anhu. The second standard. So we spoke first, or we started our first standard or first gauge with Umar radiallahu anhu. And we're going to start our second standard with Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu again. SubhanAllah, an amazing man, an amazing family. And if you want to talk about application of the sunnah, who better to look at than Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, the son of Umar, who was so strict to the sunnah. They used to call him Majnoon al-Sunnah, the crazy man of the sunnah. They used to call him the crazy man of the sunnah, the crazy follower of the sunnah. Can you imagine the Prophet ﷺ died, yet he would still walk and stop in certain places for no reason. Then he would walk again and lower his head for no reason, nothing's there. Then he would go behind the mountain and come back. And when they asked him, Ya Ibn Umar, what are you doing? He goes, I remember one day I was walking with Rasulullah ﷺ and he stopped here. It's not even sunnah. Prophet ﷺ is not even there. There's nothing special about it. But just because Rasulullah ﷺ stopped, he stopped there. And then he goes, I walked with him a bit further and then he lowered his head under a branch of a tree. That tree was no longer there. Yet because Rasulullah ﷺ lowered his head there, he lowered his head. And then he went behind the mountain. What were you doing there? He goes, the Prophet ﷺ went and relieved himself behind the mountain. So I went and relieved myself behind the mountain. And then he would break down into tears. The second standard also starts with Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. See, Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu was a man who, subhanAllah, his stories, they don't end. His stories, they don't end. Al-Faruq, his criteria or his nickname is the criterion. The criterion between right and wrong. So if you want to see if you're doing something right, look at Umar. If he's doing it, it's right. If he's not doing it, it's wrong. We mentioned that when he spoke, his words agreed with the Qur'an, which hadn't even been revealed yet. So later on, Allah revealed him in the Qur'an. So his words agreed with the Qur'an. This was a man, the shaitan literally took the other road if he came down that road. The man who was literally told by Rasulullah, Ya Umar, if there was a prophet after me, it would have been you. But I am the seal of the prophets. Extreme justice. Like he was walking down the road and 3 companions were behind him. One of them was Amr al-As, the one who arguably was the most intelligent of all the Arabs. The second was Khalid ibn Walid, the general who never lost a battle. The general who never lost a battle. He even won against the Muslims in Uhud. He wasn't a Muslim at the time. They're walking behind him. Umar turns around to talk to them or to mention something, and they all flinch. So Umar asked them, why are you scared? Why are you worried? Why are you flinching? They said, we're scared of you, Ya Umar. He goes, are you scared of me because of my justice or because of my oppression? They go, because of your justice, Ya Umar. He goes, and may Allah increase your fear. He didn't care. He didn't care. So Umar al-Khattab, the criterion, the one whose words agreed with the Qur'an, the man who everyone was scared of him because of his extreme justice, the man who spent his entire life straight shooter, never beat around the bush. The man who, when everyone ran away from Mecca to Medina in hiding, he went straight to the middle of the marketplace and he told them, I'm leaving, I dare anyone to follow me. A man who lived his entire life on absolute truth. Absolute truth. Even if it would cost him his life, his family's life, whatever it is. When the Prophet ﷺ died, what happened to Umar? When the Prophet ﷺ died, Umar radiallahu anhu checked at 180. A full 180. He contradicted his entire life legacy. He contradicted his character. The man who couldn't lie even if he wanted to, was now walking around the streets of Medina telling them, whoever says that Rasulullah is dead, I'm going to pull out my sword and I'm going to chop his head off. He couldn't speak the truth no more. And when Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu put him in his place and told him, Ya Umar, be quiet and sit down, and he spoke the ayat where the Prophet ﷺ is going to die, Umar radiallahu anhu, this massive mountain of a man, his size could hold him no longer, and he dropped to his knees and he broke into tears. Look at how much they loved Rasulullah ﷺ. What's our second gauge? What did Umar and the likes of Umar and the rest of the companions do when the Prophet ﷺ died? You know, the majority of the companions, they didn't die in Medina. The majority of them died outside of Medina. This is our second gauge. Da'wah. See, someone who loves someone, even after they pass away, they cherish them by cherishing their legacy. So even the kuffar, they have this. When someone dies for a cause, they say, I'm not going to let him die in vain or die for nothing. I'm going to make sure his legacy lives on. Isn't that what they say? The companions made sure, because they loved Rasulullah, they made sure his legacy lived on. So they went out through the lands and through the earth and they spread this deen. They propagated this deen. They protected this deen. And they made sure they cherished the legacy of Rasulullah. That's our second gauge. My second gauge in how much I love Rasulullah is how much am I taking care of his legacy, Islam. My da'wah to my wife, to my kids. Well, I'm too busy at work. Wallahi, it's no excuse. I'm telling you now, prepare yourself for judgment. Wallahi, it is no excuse. But rather, you'll be judged for overworking if you didn't need to. You'll be judged for overworking at the expense of your responsibilities. So I can, you know what, I can work and make millions upon millions. You know what, I advise you to, because you can help the ummah like that. But to work at the expense of my fara'id, my responsibilities, one of them being da'wah to my wife, to my kids, to my close relatives, my friends and people that are around. Now I'm going to be questioned. About that, I'm going to be questioned. Because Allah Azza wa Jalla, He didn't tell us, make sure you support your family financially. He said, make sure you and your family, your wife and your kids don't end up fuel for hellfire. You know the coal that you light a barbecue with? Make sure you and your wife and kids do not end up being coal, fuel for hellfire. That's what your number one job is. After that, work as much as you want. SubhanAllah. So the da'wah. I'm gonna end off with a hadith. I'm gonna skip everything. I think I expanded a bit too much. I'm gonna end off with one hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he mentions that never had a prophet been sent before me by Allah except that he had amongst his people disciples and companions. I want everyone to pay attention, because we all fall into one of these two categories. The first category is that a prophet is sent to a people and Allah gives him from those people disciples and companions who follow his ways and obey his commands. Then he says, the Prophet ﷺ, he says, then there came after them their successors who claimed what they didn't practice, and they practiced that which they were not commanded to do. Lip service. They claimed that which they didn't practice. So they love Rasulullah, but they don't follow any of his sunnah. They give the shahada to Islam, but they don't follow Islam. They claim that which they don't practice, but rather they practice that which they were not commanded to do. Those are endless. Where do we start? With how much we copy the West and the kuffar of that which we're not commanded to do. So the Prophet ﷺ, he says, he who strove against them with his hand is a believer, and he who strove against them with his heart is a believer, and he who strove against them with his tongue is a believer, and beyond that there is not a grain of faith. Beyond that there is not a grain of iman. What is hadith telling us? The Prophet ﷺ and his companions and his disciples, they're gone. But there's two categories of people after them. One which claim something and don't do it, but rather do that which is haram. And there's a second category who go out there and strive against these people. They do da'wah. They call out, they go in action with their hands, in action. They strive against those who are doing the haram and those who are practicing other than what Rasulullah ﷺ told us to. With their tongues up on the manabir, up family, speaking, friends, calling, inviting, lessons, classes, CDs. In their heart, they strive against these people. Those are the ones who get the same reward as the disciples and the companions who obeyed his commands and followed his orders. And if they're not of those categories, there is not a grain of iman. I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make us of those from the second category. The ones who strive and give da'wah and call people to the truth and make sure, Ya Allah, please make sure that we're not from the first category who go against what Rasulullah teaches and against what we're even bearing witness towards. Ameen.
I wanna be in Jannah, 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 Jannah. Every Muslim dreams to be up in Jannah, 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 Jannah. A pious person's destiny. Inshallah in Jannah, 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 Jannah.